This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Hone, and it is Wednesday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. In today's video, we're going to be looking at Color Hosers. A Color Hoser is a card that hates on a particular color or colors. There are a cycle of them in Magic's latest set, Core Set 2020, and they have a long history in the game, so I was curious about which Color Hosers from the past made the biggest impact on competitive Magic. One thing to note before we get into the list, I did not include cards that just have protection from a color as a Color Hoser ability. This is because I've already done a top 10 on protection separately, so this video specifically looks at other color hosing abilities. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. Pro Tour, Legacy, and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's go to number 10. At number 10, I have Self-Inflicted Wound, part of a cycle of Color Hosers from Dragons of Tarkir. While probably not as powerful as most of the cards on this list, since at its best it's an edict effect that makes your opponent lose 2 life, the environment it existed in made it a very strong sideboard card. At the time, Abzan decks were among the most powerful around, and lots of people were playing them. Self-Inflicted Wound was really good against those decks in Standard, as it could easily take down cards like Siege Rhino and Wingmate Rock. It saw all of its play in Standard, and I think it's unlikely to see play anywhere else, since the Wound just doesn't have as high of a power level as most Color Hosers do. At number 9, I have Rending Volley, which is part of the same cycle as Self-Inflicted Wound. Both the number 8 and the number 9 card on this list have the exact same number of points, but as a tiebreaker I used the number of Pro Tours. In other words, of the two, Rending Volley has fewer Pro Tour top 8s. Anyhow, for only a single red mana, Rending Volley does 4 damage to either blue or white creatures, and on top of that it can't be countered. This is pretty powerful and pretty typical of most Color Hosers. It is completely useless against opponents who don't have creatures in one or both of those colors, but when they do, it becomes an incredibly powerful removal spell. As a result of this, Rending Volley has always been a sideboard card. It was a heavily played one though, and was especially nice against decks running Dragonlord Ojutai in Standard, as it gave you an unstoppable way to kill Ojutai before it could draw your opponent any cards. It could kill plenty of other creatures in Standard too, like an unmonstrous Fleecemane Lion and Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Rending Volley is so good at hating on blue and white creatures that it has even seen play in Modern, though that was pretty much all back in 2015. It was particularly good at breaking up the Splinter Twin combo by killing the creature, but that deck was banned out of Modern shortly thereafter, and people haven't bothered sideboarding Rending Volley in Modern since then. At number 8 we have Hibernation, which for only 3 mana can bounce all green permanents at instant speed. Obviously, that effect is very powerful for the mana cost, but again, really only if your opponent is playing a bunch of green. If they are, you have a one-sided effect that bounces their whole board for only 3 mana. If they aren't, it's a useless card. That means, like most of the cards on this list, this was a sideboard card. In Block and Standard, it was particularly good against mono-green aggro decks. However, it was a sideboard card across multiple formats, since people tend to play green in more than just Block and Standard. In Modern, it could be particularly useful against green decks like Bloom Titan and Birthing Pod, since it could delay both of those decks a turn, which was a big deal. In Extended, it was good against Oath of Druids and Ramp decks. While Hibernation hasn't seen play in a while, you can bet that if heavy green decks, especially mono green decks, ever emerge again in any format where it's legal, Hibernation will find its way into some sideboards. At number 7 is Tidebinder Mage, a merfolk who can lock down red and green creatures. Unlike the cards we've looked at so far, the Mage has actually mostly been a main board card, since at worst you're still getting a 2 mana 2/2 with a useful creature type. This is a big deal because the other cards we've looked at so far are essentially blank against the wrong opponent. It saw mainboard play in Standard Devotion to blue decks, where you're getting a 2 mana 2/2 with upside against red and green decks, and one that provides you with 2 Devotion to blue, along with that reasonably efficient body. It also sees some mainboard play in modern merfolk decks, where its creature type is pretty useful. It hasn't seen play in a while, but merfolk decks always have a shot at most modern events, and there's a chance Tidebinder Mage could pick up a top 8 pretty much at any one of those. At number 6 we have Combust, which is pretty similar to Rending Volley and to Fry, the red card in Core Set 2020 that hates on blue and white. It costs 1 more than the Volley, but it also does 1 more damage, and the damage can't be prevented. 2 mana for 5 unstoppable damage at instant speed is some nice efficiency against blue and white decks. In Standard, it didn't actually see all that much play, receiving only 8 points in the format, and this is despite the fact that it was printed in both Magic 2011 and Magic 2012. There just weren't enough decks around that it was good against in those Standard formats. Modern has been where Combust has done the most so far. Like Rending Volley, it could disrupt the Splinter Twin combo effectively, and is also pretty nice against Delver decks. Also like the Volley though, it hasn't really seen play since 2015. At number 5 is Lifebane Zombie, which, along with Tidebinder Mage, which we looked at earlier, is part of a rare cycle of color hosers from Magic 2014. Like Tidebinder Mage, Lifebane Zombie actually does something, even if you can't get any use out of the color hosing part of the card, since it gives you a 3-mana 3/1 with a useful evasive ability, and even if your opponent has no white or green cards, you still get information out of their hand. All of this made him worth playing in the main board of Standard decks, especially those interested in Black Devotion. It also didn't hurt that Abzan decks were running amok in the format, and obviously he can hit most cards in that deck. He's never seen play outside of Standard, and I do think there's maybe a small chance someday that he does see play in non-rotating formats, maybe Modern. He does seem to do what he does efficiently enough that he at least has a chance at that. At number 4, we have Burrenton Forge Tender, the only card with protection that I included on this list. It made the list because it doesn't just have protection, it also has the additional ability to just blank a red burn spell. The Forge Tender is one of the best cards around at countering burn decks. The protection allows you to block their creatures early, and the sacrifice effect blanks an entire burn spell, something that is difficult for burn decks to recover from. As a result of this usefulness, the Forge Tender has seen play across multiple formats where it is a potent sideboard weapon against burn. It doesn't have any points in 2019 so far, but I wouldn't be surprised if it finds at least one before the year is out. At number 3, we have Flash Freeze, which is an easier to cast counterspell against opponents who are playing red and or green. It was able to stick around Standard for a very long time since it was printed not only in Cold Snap, but also reprinted in 10th edition, Magic 2010, Magic 2011, and Magic 2012. This allowed it to see play in the sideboards of a string of powerful blue decks, including Fairies, Cawblade, and Delver. These formats all had relevant red-green decks, and Flash Freeze managed to see a lot of play as a result. It has also seen play in Extended and Modern, in both formats being used the most extensively against Scapeshift decks. At number 2, we have Celestial Purge, which can deal with pretty much any red or black permanent for only 2 mana, and it exiles it, and it does it at instant speed. The fact it can hit any permanent helps push this into being an incredibly powerful sideboard card. Other cards, which only deal with specific types of permanents or are only useful in certain situations, are sometimes harder to side in, but being able to hit any permanent makes it so that this is very easy to find a target for against decks playing one or both of these colors. Originally printed in Conflux and then reprinted in Magic 2010, Magic 2011, and Magic 2012, Celestial Purge has had the advantage of being in Standard for a long time, like Flash Freeze. Black and red decks tended to be a factor in all those Standard formats, and that made Celestial Purge an important sideboard card for white decks. In Modern, it is the most potent against Jund decks because it can destroy almost every permanent in the deck, including its powerful Planeswalkers. Jund is having a resurgence in Modern right now, and so is Celestial Purge. And at number 1, I actually have 4 cards, and this is because they are so similar to each other, and because they all have a lot of points. Of these, Blue Elemental Blast would not have actually made the list, but I thought it still deserved to be mentioned with the other blasts. Red Elemental Blast, Pyroblast, Blue Elemental Blast, and Hydroblast all have the ability to counter a spell or destroy a permanent of the enemy color, and while they all only hate on one single color, it is hard to outdo the efficiency of being able to do this for a single mana. As a result, over the years, these cards have seen a lot of sideboard play in Eternal formats, and are, I think, the most powerful color hosers ever printed. Well, that does it for today's MTG Top 10. Do you think any of the color hosers from Core Set 2020 have a chance of eventually making this list? If you do, let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to see the almost 200 other MTG Top 10s I've already made, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.